That's not a productivity problem. That's not even a time problem. That's a leader whose system has hit maximum load, not because she's weak, but because the architecture she's operating in has exceeded what any human can process cleanly. So let's unpack what's actually happening, because once you see the architecture, you can't unsee it. Welcome to Trailblazing Schools, the podcast for educational leaders at the intersection of leadership, complexity, and intelligent technology. I'm Trudy Graham. This is a space for leaders navigating uncharted territory. We explore strategic leadership, ethical innovation, and how AI can strengthen the deeply human work of education. Can I ask you something? And I want you to actually sit with this for a second before we dive in. Have you ever had one of those days where nothing's finished? Everything feels urgent, and even though you're experienced and capable, you can't quite work out what to do next. I think every school leader right now is going, are you kidding me? What, only one day? Yeah, it's more like every day, Trudy. And the thing is, it's not laziness and it isn't weakness, and it's not just you. It happens to the best leaders, and often it's the most committed ones. I've been there and I've talked to so many leaders who've experienced it. And what I have come to understand is that overwhelm is not a character flaw, it's a system response. And this isn't about time management, even though it's often thought about and treated like time management. School leadership hasn't just become busier, it's become more complex, more constant, and more consequential. And this is about understanding the dynamics of overwhelm in school leadership today and why it feels different to what it used to be. In this episode, I want to walk you through what's actually happening when a leader hits the wall, the 5 dynamics that create it, because you can't find your way through something that you just don't understand. So please stick with me, and I hope by the end, I want you to feel seen, understood, and maybe you'll feel a little bit freer. So here's what's actually going on and why I think most of the just prioritize better advice completely misses the mark. You see, when leaders talk about overwhelm, we often go straight to what I call volume. There's too much to do, too many emails, too many meetings, too many demands. And that's real. The volume is absolutely real. But the volume alone doesn't explain why a highly experienced, deeply capable leader can't move, why they're stuck. And here's the thing that most people miss. Overwhelm isn't created by one factor. It's created by 5 factors that stack on top of each other. And by the time you hit the wall, all 5 are usually in play. So I'm going to name the 5 layers just so you know where we're headed. 1, volume. 2, complexity. 3, stakes. 4, constraints. And 5, human limits. And when that breaks down, that's when you're feeling stuck. And this is about understanding the architecture of overwhelm for school leaders so that we can stop blaming ourselves, which is what many of us do when we experience it. So let me tell you about a leader, and let's call her Audrey. And I suspect you might recognize yourself or someone you know in this. Okay, take a Tuesday, middle of any term. Audrey, experienced, respected, utterly capable, walks into school 7:45 in the morning with a list. She's done this 100 times. But by 9 a.m, she's responded to a parent complaint about a staff member. She's been pulled into a welfare concern about a student. She's been asked to cover a class because last-minute absence and there's a teacher shortage. So she's now found herself on class. And none of this was on the list. By lunchtime, the list hasn't moved. She probably hasn't eaten lunch either, just as a side note. She's behind on 3 reports due to regional office. There's a staff member she needs to have a difficult conversation with, which she's been putting off because she doesn't have the headspace to handle it well. And that afternoon brings a phone call from a parent threatening to escalate to the education department. She manages it calmly, professionally, and no one would know that it cost her anything. But she gets home at 6:30 in the evening. The list is still there. She opens her laptop and sits and stares. That's not a productivity problem. That's not even a time problem. That's a leader whose system has hit maximum load. Not because she's weak, but because the architecture she's operating in has exceeded what any human can process cleanly. And the next morning she comes back and she does it again because that's what she does, but something is building. And that something building, that's what we need to understand. So let's unpack what's actually happening, because once you see the architecture, you can't unsee it. The overwhelm, like I said, not caused by one thing. It's what happens when there's multiple pressures built inside a system with limited capacity. So the first layer we've already touched on, and that's volume. And it's just the entry point. The load is absolutely real. We've got a task load, we've got decision load, we've got relational load, there's emotional load. And some of these play out in the other layers as well. And it's coming from every direction. This is where most conversations about overwhelm stop, and that's the problem. Volume creates pressure, but it doesn't by itself create the paralysis, that stuck, overwhelmed feeling. So this load is what's coming at you. And the research consistently shows that school leaders are responsible for just a ridiculously wide range of tasks, far beyond instructional leadership. And you hear that all the time, right? Instructional leadership, instructional leadership, instructional leadership. But for Australian school leaders, it's much bigger than that. There's a major Australian principal workload and time use study that found principals are responsible for areas including, and I'm telling you what you already know and live, student learning and wellbeing, staff performance and wellbeing, community relationships, financial management, compliance and reporting, facilities and operations, policy implementation, and we could go on. Brian Caldwell has done work in this space just in the last couple of years, and his report, The Work Environment of the School Leader in Australia, absolutely confirms this. And the other thing is just take a look at the AITSL professional standards for principals. The role has such breadth to it. So that's volume. But the next layer is complexity, and it multiplies that load. The work of school leadership isn't just heavy, it's complex. And there's an important distinction here between complicated and complex. Complicated problems are hard, but they're solvable with specialised expertise and procedures. And they're approached with expert analysis of cause and effect, bring on troubleshooting, planning and design. A couple of examples here are like repairing a car or producing accounting statements. In contrast, though, complex problems don't have clear answers. They're unpredictable, non-linear, adaptive and emergent. They require experimentation, innovation and adaptive management because cause and effect only appears in hindsight. And some examples here are the stock market and raising a child. Complex problems require you to sit with ambiguity, hold competing priorities, make ethical judgments where more than one answer might actually be right. This is a very different cognitive demand, and it means leaders are doing hard thinking, not just hard work. Education researchers widely describe schools as complex adaptive systems. meaning leaders must navigate interacting variables rather than simple cause and effect problems. Studies using complexity leadership theory argue that school leaders must continually adapt to emerging challenges because outcomes arise from the dynamic interactions that occur between students, staff, families, policies, and communities. And there's other research on school leadership that emphasises that principals operates within environments that are shaped by diverse student needs, changing policy frameworks, social and community expectations, rapid tech changes, even evolving teaching practices. In other words, principals rarely face problems with clear technical solutions. They're constantly navigating adaptive problems. This is the complexity dimension. Now, the authors of the Workload, Work Intensification and Time Poverty for Teachers and School Leaders studies in 2023 described what they called heavy hours for school leaders. And this is characterised by rapid professional decision-making in the midst of complexity and being pulled in multiple directions, too many to turn in an hour, and the residue that lingers after an hour is over. And again, Caldwell's work here, he points to a higher level of turbulence in the wider environment and the intensification of the work itself for school leaders. And when you think about it, decisions in a school cannot be made quickly and easily. There's layers of policy, there's considerations that need to be taken, context, perspectives, consultation with others. Like, just take one behaviour incident example. You've got differing accounts from those involved. You've got witness interviews. You've got contextual factors, school procedures, system policies, communication with caregivers, staff, the students themselves. In my own experience and exasperations, I would say to myself, self-talk, nothing is simple. It felt like nothing was simple. And you know what? I now know that no, it wasn't, because we actually work in complex systems. If you see yourself as a trailblazer and you're looking for structured, strategic support to lead with clarity and conviction, visit trudygraham.com.au/connect. That's where leaders begin the conversation about working together. I'd welcome the opportunity to partner with you. Now, we go to the third layer, and this is where the stakes are at play. The stakes for what we are dealing with make it feel heavy. These decisions aren't just tasks, they actually affect children's futures, staff careers, community trust. Some of them can't be undone. I think about this as the consequence dimension. This is where emotional labour sits, because it's not just in doing the work, but in carrying what the work means. Leadership research broadly supports this as well. For example, cognitive resource theory notes that leadership decisions made under stress can impair rational thinking because high-pressure environments reduce leaders' cognitive capacity. So leaders are making decisions that affect people directly, are publicly scrutinised, and often occur under pressure. The research on wellbeing and sustainability of school leaders highlights that principals carry significant responsibility for student outcomes, staff wellbeing, school safety, community trust, and system accountability. And again, recent Australian studies also show that the emotional demands of leadership have intensified, with increasing reports of stress, mental health strain, and leaders considering leaving the profession due to unsustainable expectations. If we go to the Australian School Leader Occupational Health and Wellbeing surveys, they repeatedly report on the workload of school leaders managing and responding to the mental health and wellbeing of staff and students. Dealing with self-harm and suicide is not uncommon. attending to child safety matters, things like reporting abuse, managing welfare concerns, and ensuring safety and care for all students are all the responsibilities sitting with school principals. And then managing critical incidents, natural disasters, and death within a school community. With my more than 21 years as a school principal, unfortunately, I've experienced all of these. It's definitely not something you consider when you sign on for the job. This is not just busy work, it's heavy work, and leaders don't get to put that weight down at the end of the day. Now let's go to layer 5. Layer 5 is around the constraints that trap the pressure. Here's the part that over time breaks people. Leaders can't lessen the volume or reduce the load. They can't simplify the complexity. They can't lower the stakes. And often they can't access more time, more resources, or more support. Many studies on school leadership wellbeing highlight that principals often experience professional isolation. For example, research connected to the Australian Catholic University Principal Occupational Health, Safety and Wellbeing Survey consistently report that school leaders experience very high levels of stress, limited opportunities for confidential professional reflection, and pressure to appear confident even when situations are uncertain. One of the most commonly reported experiences is that leaders feel they must carry decisions privately. They cannot always share sensitive issues with staff or fully discuss matters with parents or escalate everything to the system or expose uncertainty publicly. So they often end up thinking through difficult situations on their own. So the pressure doesn't resolve, it accumulates. An accumulated pressure with no release valve creates a very particular kind of strain. And now let's go to the 5th layer. Human limits are the decisive factor. Leaders are not infinite processes. Under strained pressure, cognitive bandwidth narrows, decision fatigue increases, emotional regulation gets taxed, and working memory, well, it's overloaded. This is the tipping point. It's the shift from clear thinking to reactive thinking to stuck thinking. And stuck thinking is where overwhelm lives. It's not a mindset problem. It's a biology problem meeting a systems problem. And all of that lands in one place, your thinking space. I'm starting to think about modern school leadership like it's a pressure cooker. If you think about it, your work is like the contents of the pot. And in there are the people, the problems, and the decisions you make with your thinking space. Those layers that I've talked about, the volume, the complexity, and the stakes are like the heat, and they're turning it up. And then the lid on top of the pot are all of the constraints, the limited time, the resources, the support, and the sense of going it alone. Pressure isn't the problem. Leadership has always had pressure. The problem is when there's no reliable way to release it. Overwhelm isn't just having too much to do. It's having too much to process with no clear way forward. You've shifted from clear thinking to slowed thinking to reactive thinking to stuck. It's that moment where you think, I know I'm capable, but I just can't think. And that's the overwhelm. Now, before I give you a next step, I want to leave you with one question, and I don't want you to answer it quickly. Which of these layers is carrying the most weight for you right now? And have you ever named it out loud? Is it the volume, the complexity, the high stakes, the constraints, or the human limits? And that then brings us to the next step. Here's one small thing that I'd like you to try across the next week. Have a go at mapping out your current load using the 5 layers. You don't need a fancy tool, just a piece of paper will work fine. Draw up 5 columns or 5 boxes and label them volume, complexity, high stakes, constraints, and limits. And then just spend 10 minutes. You'll be amazed what you will discover in 10 minutes when you write down what's sitting in each one of those. And the point here isn't to solve anything. The point is to see the whole picture clearly, because when everything is jumbled together in your head, it all feels equally urgent and impossible. When you name it by layer, you start to see where the real pressure is coming from. And sometimes just naming it is the first movement, not a solution, just a shift. That's the thing about overwhelm. It loses a little power the moment you describe it accurately. So let's go back to that moment with Audrey at the desk and the list that won't move and the capable leader who can't start because they just don't know where to. The problem wasn't that she didn't care. The problem was that her system, her very human, very capable system, had hit its limits, and nobody had given her a map for that. Overwhelm isn't a sign that you're failing. It's a signal your architecture needs attention and you can't address what you haven't named. So I hope that today, by giving you a little of that naming, take the question with you, try the map, and come back for the next episode, because we're going to talk about what you can actually do when you understand where the pressure's coming from. See you then. You've been listening to Trailblazing Schools with me, Trudy Graham. If this episode brought someone to mind, share it with them. You'll find further reflections, practical resources and leadership tools in the show notes. Until next time, lead with courage, seek clarity and keep trailblazing.